Hello and welcome to Learning Curve, a podcast about AI's impact on education. I'm Jeff Young, a longtime education journalist. What's the best way to prepare students for a world that is quickly getting infused with AI tools? As we hear more and more about ChatGPT and Claude Code and new agentic AI offerings that are changing the world of work, how should schools and colleges get students ready? This question is kind of the core of this podcast, really. But lately, I've been wondering specifically if driving cars can help focus a debate about AI in education. Quick question for listeners. How do you feel about self-driving cars? Are you cheering them on as they roll out? Now that robo-taxis are in a few cities in the US, and the technology seems to maybe finally be maturing after a long period of hype, or maybe you fear these autonomous cars, and you want to stop them from coming to your town. Maybe you're driving a car as you listen to this, or maybe you're stuck in traffic and ready to hand that car to a robot anytime. Either way, I am glad you're along for the ride for this episode. I'm excited to bring you two guests today, two longtime educators with slightly different perspectives on this issue of what to do about AI in the classroom. Both of them have actually written books about AI and teaching, and both of them are super thoughtful. And we're packing a lot in today, so I'm going to jump right in. This episode started when I talked a couple weeks ago with Jose Bowen, who I first met several years ago when he was a dean at Southern Methodist University. And a few years later, I interviewed him again when he was president of Goucher College. For context, he also happens to be an accomplished musician. But most specifically for this episode, Jose Bowen is the co-author of Teaching with AI, a practical guide to a new era of human learning. And a revised second edition of the book is just coming out. So I started by asking Jose how his advice has changed now versus when the first edition of his book came out back in April 2024. What's he see as different now than just 2 years ago?
Well, the good news is I think, our basic framing still works, right? The idea that AI is going to change human thinking in ways that might be good and might also be very, very bad. And so we have to pay attention to that because that's what academics do, right? Thinking is our domain. So if AI changes work, there's not much we can do except react, right? We can't stop that. But we can pay attention to say, if you use AI to give yourself more creative ideas, you will be more creative and you will now have 500 ideas for new products that you can now, right? That's interesting. But if you do that all the time, your ability to write TV shows or create another article might be diminished. And the truth is we don't know what will happen. The famous, Socrates was worried about writing and cognitive offloading. And the good news is Plato wrote it down. And so we know what he said. So writing is okay. And there's some uses of writing that, clearly making a list before you go to the grocery store is a good cognitive offload, right? That's a good thing. So we really don't know. So we have to pay attention. And so we didn't know that then and we don't know it now. I still think that our worried about cheating is not going to be the primary obsession, that we have to rethink what are the assignments we want students to do, when do we introduce AI, the big pedagogical questions. And people don't like the calculator as an example, but it's good in this way. The calculator did not eliminate the need to teach math, but it did require that we think about when to introduce a calculator between first grade and graduate school. Right? Before you become an accountant, you probably have to encounter the calculator, and for that matter, an Excel spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. The question for teachers is, when do we introduce it? How do we introduce it? Is there something we no longer have to teach? Or are there some things that we still have to make you do it the hard way first? Mm-hmm. But of course, even when I say that, right? Well, okay, why would I make you do it the hard way first? Well, there has to be a reason. So we now have to explain ourselves, which is irritating to a lot of families, right? I love my subject. You should know it, right? And all of a sudden, now that we have to say, well, you do need to still learn how to add or how to write, even though AI can do this thing for you. That feels threatening, I think, for good reason. Uh, the world has changed, but it's an excess. It goes right to the core of what I love to do. I love to do this thing the hard way.
That calculator example, and you were already, pushing back, pulling back even as you said it, because people, it's kind of I hear it a ton in every kind of conference presentation about AI, and yet, I don't know, like when I think about that, we have a math, yes, people figured out teaching math with calculators. I'll give you that. However, like a lot of people don't like math. Like there's the whole math is hard. People don't choose it out. And I wonder, and I no evidence on this. Maybe you have it, but what if it's like something about the fact that the calculator in the math realm has been able to answer all the questions, and so there has been a closed off curiosity for a lot of people as they're introduced to math at introductory level. It's like, well, that seems all like solvable. Whereas now I think AI makes humanities fields and some knowledge work that used to feel maybe there's no calculator to push the button to do it. Now there is. I don't know, because I did an episode on motivation. I think there's something about knowing that a machine could do the hard thing you're doing, hitting a wall. I mean, like, you've written plenty, you wrote a book. Like, it's hard. Like, it's not fun all the time. And people they know it's not fun. And when you're doing it, you're like, I'm going to go do something else. And so if there's a button to push, I just wonder if, the solution in math is great and some people still go to math, but math is not the most popular subject on campus. It's pretty small compared to other things. I don't know. I just think there's a motivation challenge for when a tool comes along.
100%. No, 100%. Look, when I was learning math, it was you won't get the right change at the drugstore if you don't learn about quarters and nickels, right? And so the motivation was pretty obvious. And now, right, so the motivation is different. It also has to be emphasized more. And you're right, there are some things that maybe you don't have to know how to calculate 18% to leave a tip. Maybe you can use it. Maybe
It's a
you don't.
button. It's like,
Yeah, it's a
although boy,
button.
they take a lot of money if you just go with the button. But yes, there is a button. Yeah.
Well, and again, but okay, so you don't have to calculate 18%, but you do have to know that 20, 25, and 30% are higher.
Right.
Those buttons they're giving you, right? And so there are still math skills, but there may be different math skills, and they're going to be different for people, as you say, who don't like math, or so. Part of what's interesting about AI is that, right, we want to have one answer, and we can't, right? For somebody who is uh, shy, visually impaired, thinks in a different way, right? There are lots of circumstances where, okay, I want to use AI to now level the playing field in a different way. But it helps one student and it harms another, because it is a massive technology. So maybe the calculator is not the best analogy, maybe the internet, right?
Mm.
So the internet made the card catalog obsolete. Uh, for a long time, I still went to the library. I used the library's internet, right, the search online, and then or even in the library, I'd use my right. But now I don't have to go to the library as much because so much is online. Not everything, but a lot more is online than it used to, and so I can find answers to lots of questions using the internet. But the internet, right, changed our relationship to knowledge. We went from this world where knowledge was scarce but mostly reliable, right? If you had an encyclopedia, you didn't have to think really hard about whether or not it was lying to you, right?
Hmm.
It was opinion. It wasn't always perfect, right? But it didn't have any cat videos in it, right? And so now you have this internet which has abundant sources of knowledge, but most of which are lousy. So the critical thinking part becomes even more important. And so, I think that the AI is going to change our relationship with thinking, and we don't yet know the answer. So for faculty, we have to be in the game to be thinking about how AI is changing thinking and where it's, okay, that's useful. We no longer have to teach quarters and dimes. Oh no, but we do have to teach this, and we have to teach even more of that. And the hard part is we don't actually know the answer, right? We got to build the bike while we're riding it. and we don't know where the bike is going, and so right, the analogy breaks down. But I mean, but I think it's a very complicated problem to be reimagining pedagogy where we don't know where we're going to end up.
Now, the subtitle of Jose's book notes that the work is a practical guide. So I wondered what he sees as the most promising use cases for AI in teaching.
So here's one. So the new survey about doctors, right?
Mm-hmm.
84% of doctors say AI is making them better doctors. Now, the first round of research from the AMA found that the doctors were saying that because it was relieving them from doing note taking, right? That now the nurses notes insurance, right? My doctor literally, he said to me, he said, the AI is better at the insurance notes because I didn't go to insurance school. I went to medical school, silly me, right? And so I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
up insurance codes for everything I do. I just let the AI do it now, and that means I can look at you. I can talk. I can focus on our conversation. So the research supports that cognitive load increases, right? You're able to focus more on patients. So I'm able to do the more human things. But the more recent study out this week found that one of the reasons doctors say it's making them better is because it can offer alternative diagnoses.
Mm.
So that's a more interesting, right? So on the one hand, the doctor is an expert, but once I've decided what the diagnosis is, right, I get tunnel vision. I think, oh, this is what it is. I'm going to do A, B, and C. And so the AI can form as a check. So what if I'm wrong, right? What
Mm-hmm.
else? How else do I think about this? And so, or I've written this article. What are the other political party going to say about this argument? What is somebody who disagrees with me going to say about this? So I think one of the big intellectual wins for people is that AI can give you an opinion that's not yours. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so, for example, in grading, right, every faculty member has bias where they grade, right? We all like people who agree with us more, right? We like students. Oh yeah, that student is right about that because I think that, and so we grade papers in a certain way, and we think we're objective. But suppose I said, I want you to grade like my worst enemy, right? Like Professor Jones, who thinks this, or who's of the other persuasion about this theory, right? So now I could say, oh, maybe my grading was biased. And so in both the grading example and the doctor example, I think we're pretty comfortable right now with AI giving us a second opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But the social question is, will we at some point be more comfortable with AI giving us the first opinion?
Mm-hmm.
It's not unlike the self-driving cars, right? Self-driving cars are already better and safer than humans, and we should ban human driving and only allow, right, AI to drive cars. We would save lives every single day.
This is what the data from a very small set of controlled experiments tell us, I suppose. I don't
It's
know.
not a small. It's hang on. You're right. AI isn't perfect, and AI is still going to kill people when it's driving. But
Sure.
humans kill people too, and they kill them at a greater rate. And AI doesn't get mad because the traffic light just went red, right? It doesn't do certain things. So we feel uncomfortable about this. But
Right.
my point is that the problem with self-driving cars is not technical; it's social. It's we don't feel comfortable getting into it, or at least some of us, if you've not been in a self-driving taxi, it's weird.
Yeah. I've seen them on the street. I have yet to take one. It's on my list of things to try. So I guess but it's interesting, the social part. I mean, this is a big question because I think, yes, there is a way in which the value of self-driving cars, if let's assume for a minute that the self-driving car is safer in aggregate than the humans because of all these factors of human drinking and distraction and all the things. But and throw in some fails that might happen with the tech. So if you had all of that and we were sure that the tech is safer, with less deaths and injuries, it feels like there's still a lot lost when you've shifted to a world without human driving. So, and just something, I personally like to drive. My social, reluctance to do it may have nothing to do with, like, I actually would feel safe getting in a Waymo or whatever brand driverless taxi. I think it could do the job, but I don't want to stop driving. I love to drive. So even when it's something to complain about sometimes, I don't know. That's the other thing, is like, humans complain. We're going to complain about something because we're doing something and we're like, I don't know, we're born for it. So just because we complain about tasks that are tedious in learning or in driving, does that mean we should give those up? And I think the social part of this gets back to the thinking question. It's like, how much do we want to give up if we even decide that ChatGPT and Claude and all the others can actually, once we even say, okay, they can do it, is that the right decision to like bring them in? And in what point, even to a classroom, I see you're saying that each individual teacher now has this choice they need to figure out how to navigate. And it seems like broadly, there's this bigger question of like, how much, what are the norms going to be for letting us, for knowledge work, both inside the academy and in the workplace?
Yeah,
I
and,
don't
and
know.
J Joshua Rothman has this really interesting article in the New Yorker about, right, when AI comes for culture,
Yeah,
and
I, I saw that one.
so you're right, and I love that piece because it's right. It is about these questions of what should we do, what will be comfortable, what is okay. Is it okay if AI, because at the moment we allow algorithms to curate what we watch on Netflix or any right
Mm-hmm.
whatever, but it's a whole nother thing when in fact I'm watching new episodes of the original Star Trek and you're watching new AI episode right of some right of something else that only you were watching.
It's crafted for me. It's like spun up for me.
And so you can't share it with anybody else because nobody
Right.
else. So and I think so. Again, there are two questions. One is, will humans be comfortable doing that? And I think that the answer to that is absolutely yes. That will happen. In the same way that I do think, right, when the technology gets better for self-driving cars, we will eventually, right, get used to this. And right, I mean, the first thing that's going to happen is that your car will no longer allow you to speed through a school zone, right? It'll just say, right, because the car already knows when you're speeding, and so you could either give everybody a ticket who does that, or you could just say, don't let the car speed through school zones between 7 and 8, right? Just the car slows down and you don't have any control. We will hate that, but it will be probably good public policy once that technology, and really we could do it today, and the fact that we don't means that we don't feel comfortable. But your question about whether what happens when we enjoy it is, and what happens to human interaction is the one that I think is really hard. I don't think, again, from Socrates' point of view, writing is going to diminish us. And he was right. We don't
Hmm.
remember as much, right? There are things that, being oral poetry and remember, right? But not having to remember the grocery list or my wife's phone number probably frees up my brain to do other things. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a compromise. And so will some people choose the other? I don't know. And so that's again, that's this building, riding the bike while we're building it. We don't yet know, oh, this is going to be okay. We're all going to accept that writing has its uses. Or no, we really are, we won't be able to go back. And so I think we need to be vigilant about that. I mean, we didn't like Pixar at first either.
Hmm.
Digital animation. That's not human. Let's go back to hand drawn, right? We didn't like that at first. We didn't like the eraser, right? We banned that. That's going to change writing too. So most of us are okay with erasers and typewriters and chalkboards, all things that higher ed banned at one point. But that doesn't mean I think we should automatically accept AI. It just means that I don't know if AI is more like an eraser or writing or a typewriter or the internet or a calculator. Uh, I think there is a large probability that it will diminish humans and human creativity and human abilities. And I think we have to be vigilant for that. At the same time, students are entering a workforce where they need to be able to use AI. And indeed, one of the book's premises, which I think has become true, is that we initially wrote that AI can do AI is the new C, right? It's the new average. Of course, AI
Mm-hmm.
is the new A now, which means we have to raise
Maybe an
standards.
A minus. Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think that at the time, I think there's a lot of places where AI can do work that's as good as almost the best human work, right? Maybe not the very best. Uh, right? There's that wonderful study that right. It's not Christopher Nolan, but it can sure as heck write new episodes of CSI as well as any right.
Interesting.
So it can it's not going to be as creative as the absolute greatest creative geniuses, probably for a while, but it's way better than the average creative human already. And so again, that's not a moral argument. That's just a research finding. So I think that what we have to do is think about how do we raise standards so that humans and AI together produce work that is better than either AI or humans alone could do. And that's going to be the new workplace standard.
Now, when I talked to Jose, I pointed out that professors are not the only ones complaining about the use of AI for cheating in classes these days. Many students that I've talked to lately see this widespread use of AI in classes, often in dishonest ways, as a real crisis for them. Since, after all, they are now competing against students, some of whom are willing to take shortcuts with AI, and that leaves some rule-following students feeling like they can't show what they know compared to those who are just using AI.
But I would argue that the pure AI is not going to be as good as the AI plus human. That when the human comes in and says, "Oh, okay, what else could I do? How could I make this better?" Right? If I write some of this, and I would argue that is that cheating? If the student copy and paste from AI, that's clearly misuse or fraud, right? It's not plagiarism legally, but it is cheating. But if I get AI to give me feedback on how to make it better against this rubric, if I get AI to give me, what is this professor likely to not like? But I write every single word, is that still cheating? And so that example gets us to we're probably entering a new age where in the same way that the spell checker, you have to look up words in a dictionary. Well, the spell checker was initially banned, but now I use a spell checker. The important thing about the spell checker is that it makes my spelling better, which means I can focus on other things, which means I now have to spend more time either writing better articles, doing more research, writing a better thesis, but it does not make my spelling better, right? It doesn't make me a better speller, I should say, right? It doesn't make so. The question then is spelling still important if I'm going to run everything through a spell checker? Yes, but probably not as much, right? I can get away with certain kinds of things. And grammar checkers now do this too. So that's hard if you're a really good speller and you spent your whole life learning how to spell and you
You
don't
didn't
need
do
a
many
spell
spelling
checker.
bees, did you? Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
right. My wife doesn't use. She's a great speller. When I'm writing a handwritten card, I've still got to say, is this how do you? Because I don't write, but on the computer, it fixes it for me. So I think what are those skills? I think that's all in flux and what we're going to need. But you're right. I think we should focus on fraud, on misuse, on over reliance. We need a whole new set of terms. But the point is, if I'm teaching you to spell and spelling at some level is still important, then I ban the spell checker because I'm teaching you spelling.
Right. It's a spelling class, so you're not having it. Yeah.
But if it's a lab report in a chemistry class and you're not a native English speaker, or you're a faculty member who's doing a proposal for the National Science Foundation, right, and you want to make sure it's in their template, there are places where this is going to make it better. And so I think we're going to see a raising of standards. In the same way that you said, well, we can tell. Well, we used to be able to tell it was an AI picture because it had 6 fingers. Well, it doesn't have 6 fingers anymore, and they're getting harder to tell. And at some point, it's the way that we tell this is AI slop is not because it's lousy. It's because, oh, well, it was posted by this person who I know doesn't. Or what's the, Mike Caulfield talked about the intellectual provenance, or what is the how did we get
the
to
watermark
this?
of it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, not even the watermark, but how do I know, where could this have come from? I have to do background research. So that's a different set of, he has a wonderful GPT called Deep Background. That's really good because it's about what are the possible sources? Who else says this is true? Right? Figuring and his question, I love it. It's not, is this true? It's, is this what I think it is? Right. That's a great question is this what I think it is becomes the new question in the internet age. So I think that's an example of how we have to reframe what it is we think of is as cheating, what's intellectual work, what matters. But I do think that in the same way that we now accept that I did research, but I used the internet. I did not go to Vienna to check the Beethoven manuscript on this. I used the internet. I used a fax, whatever. We now accept we don't insist that you do certain kinds of things. You had to use the card catalog.
I do kind of miss the card catalog, but there's benefits of doing it the way we do it now.
Well, I enjoyed it too, but the question is, we no longer test people and say, well, I need to have a disclaimer that you use this.
Sure.
Did you use a spell checker, right? 1 in 3 Fortune 500 companies require not just spell checkers, but Grammarly on every communication. Require. So, I say what we call cheating, business calls progress. So, but when I'm teaching you how to spell, then I need you, right? That's what I'm teaching you. And so it depends on the purpose. So I would rather us focus on learning. What is it students need to learn? And how will
Right.
I know you've learned it rather than, aha, this is cheating. And I think what we call cheating is going to change.
The thing that I'm curious if you have a thought on, especially from your perspective, having written this book and revised it, is okay, the driving metaphor, back to the self-driving cars. Driving is a very defined skill. Like, it's can you drive? Can you pass the driving test? It's like we've worked all that out. And we let only certain types of people with the license drive. And I have a 14-year-old in a couple years. It's terrifying, but he's going to be out on the road. So with you're saying that we don't even know what skills we need to teach students in the new knowledge work because now whatever like now forget the driving metaphor, whatever we do with like knowledge and whether it's like all the different jobs that require you to go to college, whether it's research or banking or finance, or there's lots of skills involved that college is taught. And now the question is, how much of it is going to be self-driving, whereas knowing it is not super valuable or needed, and how much of it is going to be you need to know how to drive the car and do other things. And that's the part where, and what are those other things? Like, what are there enough of those other things if there's self-driving knowledge work? I don't know. These are the things that I think are kind of getting brushed over. And I think some of the anxiety about cheating is actually just this existential crisis about what's left for me as the teacher and the student.
Yeah, no, people are talking about faculty grief, faculty anxiety.
Yes.
It's a very existential. It is the thing that I love to do is now being threatened, and I like to do it the hard way. So, no, I totally think that is driving a lot of this anxiety. And the self-driving car metaphor here really works. So there's probably an intermediate stage where your children will learn how to drive so they have some expertise just in case the self-drive fails, you can take over. But their children will probably never learn how to drive
Wow.
because either it won't be required or you'll be actually forbidden, or if
Or there won't be a steering wheel, right?
there won't
Or
be a steering
something.
wheel. The car companies are already designing cars,
Right.
right? That because of course at some point, and again that's why the new Amazon taxi is interesting because they didn't retrofit. They designed a little pod that doesn't have a steering wheel because you don't need one. And so I think the question about what is going to be self-driving research is an important one. I think that, right, we know that being an expert matters. Being an expert makes me able to use AI better because I can ask better questions and evaluate answers, which was what we think.
Evaluate answer. Yeah, when it's like, well, that's not right. I'm going to rerun that. Yeah.
And so that's the fundamentals of AI literacy. It's step one is asking better questions, evaluating answers. How to use the tool, I think, is going to be an essential skill. And the last thing I'll say about that is that right, I am not a computer guy. Part of my expertise is that I'm a creative, right? I am a musician. I think about, ooh, what else could I ask it? How else could I phrase this question? Suppose I asked it to do that. So my advice for people is start with something that you hate. Don't start with something that you love because you like doing that. But start with something that you hate, like doing the department schedule, accreditation reports, certain kinds of grading, right? Designing customized assignments for each individual student or a makeup midterm, right? Start with something that you don't really love and then see if AI can do it as well or even better than you can. And then figure out, now what do I do with that extra time? Could I do something valuable for my students that nobody else could do and no AI could do with my students? Could I use that extra 3 hours a week to have more office hours to do something else. But don't start with something that you like because that defeats the purpose. So for you, don't start with self-driving cars, right? Because you like driving. But for me, I hate driving. I'm perfectly happy to say I don't ever have to drive again. I don't like it. It's not a thing I enjoy, and I'd be much happier just having somebody else or something else drive me.
After my conversation with Jose, I was curious to bring in another take on these questions about how to best teach in the AI era. And I thought of someone else with a recent book on the subject who brings a more skeptical focus. And it turns out a different take on the link between driverless cars and AI chatbots. We'll hear that response to Jose's ideas and give Jose a chance to respond after the break. Hey everybody, I am using this ad break to highlight the Learning Curve newsletter. This is still evolving, but now it has links to AI news and interesting pieces that I'm reading about AI in education, as well as links that go deeper into the topics of every episode. So if you haven't already, please check out the newsletter. Just visit learningcurve.fm and click on the newsletter link at the top. Now back to the episode. I really enjoyed my conversation with Jose, and I appreciated his saying that there will be trade-offs as these generative AI tools are adopted, and that, in a way, we don't know what they are yet. I still felt, though, that his vibe was kind of like, well, since the workplace is quickly adopting AI, it is important for colleges to expose students to these new tools and not get too caught up in nostalgia, which is totally an important point in all this. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. So I was curious to include another take here and zoom in a little bit more on what we can learn from the driverless car technology as we think about the arrival of generative AI tools in education. Of course, as you're starting to pick up, I'm not actually talking about the mechanics of driverless cars. It's more the cultural vibe and pace of adoption that I'm interested in here. So I called up John Warner, another person that I've talked to many times over the years in my reporting. And he is the author of a recent book called More Than Words: How to Think About Writing in the Age of AI. John has taught college writing for a long time, and he writes a fantastic column at Inside Higher Ed where he often muses about AI's impact on education. I thought he might disagree with Jose, but in a helpful and nuanced way that might help both of them refine their arguments and would push them both farther for this broader discussion. And basically, I was curious to hear John's take. So I emailed John my interview with Jose. I sent him the file, and he listened to everything that you just heard. And then I scheduled a call with him. And then I scheduled a Zoom call with John to talk about his reaction.
Where I think Jose and I disagree, or where our frames are different.
Yeah.
When I sort of read his book or hear what he had to say to you, I see a focus on helping students get through school.
Okay.
My view is we should be focused on learning. And those things, as I've written in different books, in different contexts, different times, those things are not necessarily aligned.
Huh.
And when I say learning, I mean things like learning that I shouldn't be in college right now. Things like I'm in the wrong major. Things like the kinds of things that my parents want me to do are not what I want to do. This is all part of what I think should be happening as students build their agency and their self-knowledge and that kind of stuff when they're in college. And using this technology, one of the things he talks about is raising the bar, right? Like we can raise the bar of what we ask students to produce because they can use this technology. That fundamentally doesn't make sense to me because it puts the emphasis on the product, right? So as the technology evolves, we're like, oh, we're gonna demand more in terms of the product. Like we can write a quasi PhD dissertation using something like deep research or perplexity, right? Without actually knowing all that much about
You
the
can make
underlying
a
subject.
work product that looks like a book. Now, can I push back just slightly, because I'm very curious. I actually think that's a really interesting distinction. And I was just, I listened to the Hard Fork podcast, the tech podcast from the New York Times. And one of the things that, one of the co-hosts said, he wrote his book faster because of perplexity and all the things. But he knows how to write books like the old fashioned way. But there was a part of me that's like, so is Jose Bowen's idea of like raising the bar mean that like, instead of writing a paper that no one sees but the professor, now we can expect students to write a publishable essay that will be then, or like a short ebook that you could even probably publish somewhere, or some like next level up? Or are you saying that actually because of the shortcut, a beginner writer or somebody learning through it wouldn't actually be able to understand and process a book's worth or a short book's worth? They would still be at the same stage. So you'd just be like, you'd be dressing it up in some way.
Yeah, a huge part of how I look at these things is, and particularly because of my lens as a writing teacher, right? Like my lens is always writing. Writing itself is an experience. So the fact of producing a book-length text faster, I don't know, was it Kevin Roos or Casey Newton?
It was Kevin Roos, yeah.
So Kevin Roos producing a book faster. I understand the benefit to Kevin Roos, a professional journalist with many responsibilities, right? He writes a column for the New York Times. He's got his podcast.
Probably speaking tours like you.
Speaking tours, right? He's doing all this kind of stuff. He's also writing on a subject that is constantly evolving, right? So being able to shorten the time to produce a book, all that makes sense to me. But he changed the experience of writing a book in using these tools to do so. And in doing that change of experience, he likely learned less at a sort of deep level, right? Where we sort through and we acquire these things. I mean, you know this better than you were a student of John McPhee, right? I mean, so you know what that is.
Yes,
right?
I'm actually going to try to link to that. I'll link to that interview I did with McPhee for my past podcast.
Like his whole method. I actually just got a book. Somebody at Princeton University Press. It's basically just a career bibliography of McPhee.
Oh my God! Yeah,
it's not really
you're making me want to read his stuff right now. Yeah,
it's interesting to sort of see like what he did. But his method, as you know, like draft number 4 of that book, was to literally metabolize the material.
I like that word, metabolize. Yeah,
that he was going to
process.
Write about.
Yeah,
yes, and a deep breaking down and the things he would do around structure and moving things around, right? Nobody could say John McPhee was not productive or even prolific, right? He probably could have done 4, 5, 10 times as much if he could have figured out how to produce John McPhee books with large language models. But what's the point of that, right? Like, what do we need that for? The experience of the making of the thing in a learning context, right? This is separate from like Kevin Roos writing a book that he's contracted to do, that he's probably getting paid good money for, versus a student who's learning how to do something. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like a student could write a 750-word essay that has more meaning to them as the experience than a 10 or 15,000 word article or something like that, just because we have this technology that allows them to produce something that maybe passes muster, right? With the sorts of criteria we give these things. Maybe this is my philosophy, maybe this is my mentality, maybe this is because I look at this through the lens of writing, but I don't get it. I don't understand the allure of that at any level. The same way that I don't understand why academics are using this stuff to crank out vastly greater sums of quote unquote academic research. We don't need any of that shit, honestly.
Right.
Like,
In other
it's
words,
just
like to make more books that no one was reading or articles that
well,
few
and that
people were consuming. Yeah.
and that don't fundamentally advance the field, right? That merely are sort of like, oh, this is something I get to put on my CV.
Box checking.
Box checking. Yeah, I can maybe find this. You'll probably be able to find this by the description. It was
Sure.
an article that was that essentially large language models are a help at producing academic research, but it's bad for science writ large, right? Good for the researcher whose job is to produce published research, but it narrows the field. It has the potential to narrow the field of inquiry in science writ large because, using this tool to produce research will orient us towards the particular things that the tool can help us produce, right? And so learning, because learning to write fundamentally is about the experiences of writing. So anytime we divert from the experience of writing, we are not learning to write. Now, I'm open to the idea, although still skeptical, that we should, in addition to teaching students to write, we should have them also learn how to do Gen AI assisted document production, right? Which is maybe a skill on top of writing, or the sort of thing that like Kevin Roos is doing, right? Somebody who can write but wants to produce a document, a particular written artifact can do this. My strong intuition that I think is also increasingly backed up by evidence is that the people who are going to best use this technology for that document production on top of writing know how to write, can do everything without it, that there's sort of a fundamental, what I call a practice, the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and habits of mind of the practitioner, that when in place allows us to use the technology more quote unquote productively, effectively, with integrity. I think that's almost commonsensical, right? That there is not some new sort of cognition that we're on the cusp of the kind of human AI enhancement where we can be less human and add the AI and be something better. I think we have to be as much human as ever in order to make use of the AI, right? That there isn't a shortcut there.
So is it the superpower, together you're like the mech warrior where the person gets in the suit in the, one of those alien movies or something.
You still got to be human.
But you have to be human. Yeah.
You have to be fully human. I mean, I just, some of that is my intuition, but I do think to some degree it's common sense. If you look at the world of the people who are using this stuff, say they're using it productively, right, to enhance their work, and you talk to them and you interview them and you see they have this huge base of existing practice that allows them to extend with this technology. Like they know where that can be done. If you don't have that, it really is just a substitute for some aspect of your cognition, right? And I think with, when we're talking about students, these are important times, right? Like they're as they're developing, where we allow them to use this to remove the friction of learning, we're probably doing them a disservice.
John says that in his own experience as a college student and early in his career, he felt like he went down some dead ends as far as courses he took and things he tried, and that doing that helped him figure out what he really wanted to do with his life. And he worries that that kind of journey will be hindered for today's students if they just check boxes using AI tools to do their work. And he says that's true even if the work they end up making with those AI tools is better than if they didn't have them. This made me think back, of course, to the idea of driverless cars and what Jose and I were just talking about. Can we learn anything from thinking about driverless cars, assuming I guess, or even our assumptions. I guess he was kind of a. It sounds like Jose Bowen's idea was these are probably coming. The research is showing they're probably safer. So maybe we just need to get used to it. And I feel like, and therefore maybe that means in generative AI, it's coming. We're going to need to adjust. Like, so how can we do the best with that adjustment as possible as humans? I guess, where are you? Do you agree with with that?
I think there's a couple angles I take on this. Like self-driving cars, right? Are they inevitable? Um, Clearly they're here, right? In some contexts,
Right,
right?
they're
If you go
driving
to
around. They're
if you
actually
go to
coming to where I live. Apparently, the Twin Cities is going to get them next.
yeah, if
The
you go to San
Waymo.
Francisco or Austin, right,
Yep.
you or other cities, you can get a Waymo. Can I wrap my head around the idea that like all of us are going to be driving self-driving cars within my lifetime? That's very hard to conceive, right?
Yeah. It's a
Um,
big difference.
it's a big difference. It's a heavy lift, right? It results in like disrupting a huge chunk of like American industry and infrastructure
Sure.
and this kind of stuff. Like I think the mere fact that we can maybe do some current comparisons and say these things are safer or are going to be safer are probably not enough, I think, by themselves to change these things. But the similar to my comments earlier, sort of the difference between like teaching and learning with cars and self-driving cars and driving, it is sort of the difference between outcome product and experience, right?
How do you mean?
Well, like a full network of self-driving cars will get us from point A to point B faster and safer than our current system, right? Like the interstates in Charleston where I live at rush hour um, are as packed as they can be, but they move like 5 miles an hour, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
With self-driving cars, they can be as packed as they can be, but they might be able to move 30 or 40 miles an hour,
Yeah.
right? As
Yeah.
sort of the
Let's assume for a minute. Sure. Yeah.
like when my friends and I first got our licenses and we were lived in the suburbs of Chicago, we'd like drive into the city and purposefully get lost and then reorient our way home, right? This kind of uh autonomy and agency and self-efficacy that we developed. And again, these are some of the experiences that I saw my students over time have less of. My my impulse for this technology every time is rather than embracing it or even necessarily shunning it, is to use it as a lens to examine those things we claim to value now, ask whether we truly do value them, right? Like I think it's exposed a bunch of the stuff we have students do in school we actually didn't care about all that much, right? We were
Mm.
pretending.
Like, give me
It's
one example. I think I've read it in your
well,
work, but
well, like whether or not they learned something in a course, right? If you can pass a test, we're going to say you learned that. But we have all kinds of research that says, you pass this test, but you don't retain any of this information.
in other words, professors may have had an inkling that the system wasn't serving students in that mission of learning, but it was working well enough for them personally, and so it just continued.
I'm going to try to find this quote real quick. Just happen to have a copy of my book sitting next to me, and I know who said it, so I can look him up.
Great.
Um, so this was in the Chronicle not that long after ChatGPT showed up, and the professor named Michael Clune, who he was a Case Western at the time. He's since moved on to Ohio State.
Okay.
Um, this is me, and then you'll see where the quote comes in. Seeing the capabilities of ChatGPT, Michael W. Clune, an English professor at Case Western Reserve University, observed that the application generated essays that meet all the official criteria for student writing. They have a thesis, they are polished, coherent, and well argued. They support their points with evidence. They also lack any trace of surprise or originality, make no new connections, and are devoid of any striking use of language or evidence of individual human sensibility. He goes on to say that as I say here, considering this, Clune has come to believe that what he'd been asking his students to write was, in his words, bullshit. Now in ChatGPT, we have an application that can produce bullshit on demand. This suggests to me that the official criteria Professor Clune was using is not particularly meaningful, right? We allowed these sort of like
Yeah.
proxies,
Yeah.
correctness, right? A sort of surface level fluency pass for learning, but they weren't necessarily evidence of that. They certainly weren't evidence of something interesting or meaningful, as sort of Clune admits there. So I think we need to use this as a lens to examine this.
The thing I want to come back to and finish, to me, that I think I can mold all this into. So we've talked about driverless cars as cars, but I think the difference between you and Jose that I'm hearing is that he believes there could be like an equivalent of something like driverless research or driverless kind of learning or academic guising, whatever you want to call it. And it seems because that, and I'm hearing you say you're a little worried about his framing focusing too much on product and boosting in a product, making the product be better without the learner. I guess, do you think there is a way to have driverless learning or driverless research in where the computer is really doing a lot of something in a way that, like, metaphorically, the car can do in a driverless car?
I mean, probably. A lot of it would depend on sort of the subject, the discipline, and what the end to those means is intended to be, right? Like what are we doing with this research, right? The example that generative AI boosters always talk about, AlphaFold.
Sure. This is
That
the
is
genetic using
that
AI to
that
help.
fold to
Yeah.
fold proteins in ways in combinations that at a speed and depth and breadth that humans simply cannot do, and it made
It won the
discoveries.
Nobel Prize. This is
Yeah,
yeah, we could link to it in the
yeah,
show notes. Yeah.
yeah. These things, these. So yes, like this is already proof of that concept. Um, if I drag this idea into the realms I'm most familiar with and find most meaningful, like humanistic uh, study,
Sure.
my answer is no, because who gives a shit, honestly? Like I
If
don't
you're not
care.
curing cancer, if it's
Well,
humanities, you're
like
learning something.
I don't care. I am fundamentally uninterested in a novel produced entirely through a large language model. Even if somebody's like, "Oh, it's really good," I don't care. It's not interesting to me. Part of what is fundamentally fascinating to me about first reading, right? First I was a reader, and now writing, is that somebody else, some unique intelligence,
Another human.
another human, had a notion that
Yeah.
they turned into an expression, an article, a book, a novel, nonfiction book, work of history, whatever. And that expression is entirely um, unique in the same way each of our individual DNA is unique, right? That thing could only be made by that person.
Yeah.
And that has always been fundamentally interesting to me. And the idea that we could have a convincing simulation of that, I just don't care. I just have zero interest in it. Um, I'm open to the idea that I might be able to be fooled someday, right, by the AI generated novel. But if you told me this is
Or we could
AI,
have like Agatha Christie books, even though she's passed, right? Or
yeah, oh
yeah, like
yeah. Like I think one of the examples Jose used, like it'll make more episodes of like your favorite show,
there we go.
right? I
Yeah.
can't remember if it was you or he who brought up Perry Mason, but
Yeah, I think it was him. Yeah, Perry
is
Mason. There we go.
like again, this is my personality, my disposition, my background. That sounds horrible to me.
Right.
I don't need more of the same thing that I like all the time. That does not keep me engaged and interested in the world and around me. I want to see human iteration, unique intelligences building on each other in the way that um, there will be a demand for that sort of stuff. I have no doubt, right,
Mhm.
that there will be a demand for that. But I think ultimately, I wonder how interested people will be in it.
What advice then do you give professors that want to cope with this world or prepare their students for the world they're going to enter, where where we're still not sure which or what mix of those things will help them make a living, or the other things that maybe you don't want to think about, but I don't know, but that has to be thought of.
I think our high calling is to help students develop human agency so that they can be have lives of self-determination in a world where this technology exists. And so in some cases, this may involve um, significant integration of this technology into the work. In other cases, it will involve total refusal of this technology into the work and lives. But our job is to help them make the choices that make sense for the lives they want to lead. So I put agency at the center of the challenge because ultimately the choice to use this technology comes down to a demand side issue. Either the student sees a reason to use it or they do not. And we can create the situations, the incentive structures that help them make the choice that's best for them, right? Like in my writing course, this stuff would not have any utility. It's not what we're doing. And I would design the course in such a way where students would have a hard time finding utility in this technology and doing this work, not just what they're doing, but how it's being assessed and what's being valued and this kind of stuff. This is the challenge, right? There's probably some disciplines where the technology has more salience, where it's more than a novelty, where it is some future extension of the capacities of the practitioners of this particular type of field, right?
Right.
But we have to figure that out, and we don't know what that is. I don't think we're probably even particularly very close to knowing what that is in most disciplines. That's what we have to be looking at.
Honestly, on many of the most important things about education, Jose and John actually agree. But I think also there is a slight disagreement here, and one that I was curious to hear Jose respond to. So I sent a recording of my interview with John back to Jose and invited him to send an audio memo with a response.
You're right. I agree with John about a lot. If you'd read the previous book, Teaching Change, the 3 R's, relationships, resilience, and reflection, we might have had a different conversation. Because I do think our educational critiques are the same. I think that AI has exposed a lot of the transactional nature of what many faculty do. And I think John's an unusual teacher. I wish more teachers were really concerned with how students develop their sense of self, their sense of agency. And I still think there are people out there still teaching the 5-paragraph essay and teaching you how to, do financial analysis or whatever, job skill you need. I think it's both. I don't think it has to be either or. I want students to develop agency, become the humans they really can to live thriving lives. But I also think that includes some of the skills to getting a job. So this reminds me of Neil Ferguson's idea of the cloister and the starship, that maybe we need both, right? So the cloister is this space where there's no technology and students just have to develop those critical thinking skills, manually. And then they spend some time in the starship with all the technology, which is probably going to be required for job skills. It's not the perfect analogy, and right, I mean, the cloister is right. Only academics would think of that, but I think it's useful. John also makes me think that I probably do think a little bit more about product, although I care deeply about process too. And I think some of that's because of this metaphor that I think of as the gym, right? That it's a useful metaphor in lots of ways, right? The person who does the work gets the benefit. So watching someone else do push-ups is not that useful. So when you go to the gym, you need to do the work yourself. And the work itself is the point, right? So what a fitness coach does is structure that work so that you get the right amount of discomfort and that you keep making progress.
And right, fitness coaches are motivators, right? They always count backwards. They're trying to get us to do a little bit more, to have a little bit more discomfort. But what's interesting about that analogy is that, right, when I go to the gym, I see this fitness coach who is, got all these muscles and the overly tight tank top, and I think that's so weird, right? This person likes the gym so much, they just come for fun. And I had this realization years ago because a student said to me, wait, you go to the library just for fun? And it was, yes, I do. And the student looked at me like I had three heads. And I realized, oh, okay, faculty, we're unusual, right? We go to the library for fun. We like school so much we're still here. And I think John and I are both very much those kinds of people that go to the library for fun. But I don't go to the gym for fun. I go to the gym because of the benefit, right? I want to be able to pick up the grandkids. I don't want to fall down in the shower. So I do go almost every day, and I don't hate it, but I don't go because I love it. I do go because of the benefit, right? So in his words, the product, right? I don't love the process. So I think that's probably useful because I think that for faculty, we do love the process. And for a lot of students, school is a means to an end. And so I'd like to get as many of them over to my side as possible. But I think I'm a realist and recognize that for many of them, it is, the end result that matters. So, but there's another way. Mark Carnes pointed out to me the other day that the problem with my metaphor of the gym and then adding on the raising the bar is that AI could allow us to lift more weight. And of course, that defeats the purpose, right? So now I can lift more weight because I'm using AI. I've raised the bar, literally. And he's right. So I've thought about this analogy a bit more in the light of what John has said. And I think that, there's a danger here, which is that AI allows us to do things we can't do in the same way that a spell checker, right, makes my spelling better, but doesn't make me a better speller. On the other hand, when I go to the gym, I have a choice, right? I can go and do free weights. But I could also go and do those machines, like those Nautilus machines that only exercise one part of my body, right? Just my legs or just my arms. And that can be useful in the same way that if I use AI to focus or strengthen just on one thing, like like my analogies, right? I could write a prompt. So help me improve my analogies, challenge them, find relevance, etc. So that's a way that an AI might help me target a specific part of my learning, which could be useful. And so I think we have to try to look for the ways to do that, but balance that with the danger that if AI just does the lifting, of course, then we don't learn anything.
After hearing that response we just heard, I ended up calling Jose one last time to kind of dig in a little more to what he's talking about. And as we talked, the point he ended up coming to is that there is just a huge tension right now with generative AI between this push to teach the technology and the fear that bringing in this particular technology might be bad for the learning of basic information literacy skills. Partly it's just so alluring because it can do passable knowledge work, and often that can get in the way of students learning themselves.
Right. So if I think my learning outcome, my course or my university learning goals are critical thinking, public speaking, professional communication, writing. Those typically don't compete with each other, right? They're learning to write well and critical thinking.
Yeah, they're not mutually. Yeah, they can just add them or not. I see. Yeah.
But now, if we need to say, well, AI literacy is now a learning outcome. Well, AI literacy could compete against all of those, right? That's new, right? It's a different kind of technology, right? Digital literacy with the internet didn't compete against critical thinking, right? It was complementary. But AI literacy could compete. And so that's where I don't know the answer, but it's a new question we have to ask, which is, so we both believe that self-awareness, identity formation, discovering, what you really think is important. We both believe that AI literacy, that some sense of, how to use these tools to get a job is important. I think we both agree on both of those things. The question is, we now have a situation where those two things might be in conflict. And I'd love for someone to say that, no, that's happened before. It happened with typewriters or something. I don't think it's ever happened, right? Maps, GPS. I mean, has there been a previous, maybe writing, right? Maybe Socrates was right. Does writing challenges the other kind of critical thinking? At the time, we now don't think so, but at the time he thought it did. And so, but maybe he was right.
I guess it's a question each educator these days, and maybe every student, is really wrestling with. This has been Learning Curve. Every episode, we explore big questions about education and AI. If you want to share your thoughts on today's episode, or you have a suggestion for another topic I should cover, please email me at jeff@learningcurve.fm. If you want to hear a longer version of the interviews from this episode, you can check out a supersized version on Learning Curve Plus. Just head to learningcurve.fm to find out more about that. If you don't already, I hope you'll subscribe to Learning Curve on your favorite podcast platform, and please spread the word about the show on social media, or tell a friend in person. This episode was put together by me, Jeff Young, and you can find more of my reporting about education at jeffyoung.net. I'm also doing some speaking these days based on what I'm learning from talking to students and professors about AI. So please get in touch if I might be a fit for a conference or event that you're planning. Music for this episode is by Komaku, and the episode art was generated by Midjourney. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Thanks so much for listening.